A doorway to power quietly opened inside the Pentagon, and almost no one noticed, until one lawmaker walked in and asked the kind of questions that freeze a room, expose the truth, and force the most powerful people in government to reveal what they're terrified to say out loud. This isn't just political theater. It's a rare moment when someone in authority is pushed to choose between loyalty and principle, between influence and integrity. And the way he dodges every answer tells a story far bigger than the hearing itself. Because when a defense secretary can't draw a line.
Here now recognizes the gentlelady from Hawaii, Ms. Takuda.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I agree we've had many performances today, but what we'd like is some answers. Mr. Secretary, did you invite Elon Musk for a briefing on war plans with China to the Pentagon? Yes or no is simple.
There's been a lot of hyperbole and incorrect reporting around that situation, but we did invite Elon over to come talk to us generally, but there was no war plans being discussed.
Okay, so whose idea was it to invite him to the Pentagon for a briefing? You mentioned you served at the pleasure of the president. Was it the president's will to have him come and be briefed?
Well, as you know, at that time, Elon Musk was leading up Doge efforts, and we've taken a great investment in Doge at DoD, and so getting his input on how we make DoD more efficient makes a great deal of sense.
Okay, but don't you think it's a conflict of interest for the world's richest man? Many of the contracts that the DoD is engaged in, billions of dollars of contracts going to his company, and he is, as to your point, was leading Doge, which was involved in cutting hundreds of contracts, but also becoming intimately aware of the platforms and the requirements that would be given out for new contracts. Did you not think it was a conflict of interest to invite someone with financial interests into the Pentagon to have firsthand knowledge of what they could then bid on for their own, enrichment?
Ma'am, it was just an informal discussion, but I'll tell you, anyone that knows our Defense Department knows we show no preference to any company other than what your capabilities are, and we're grateful for the places where his companies benefit our national defense.
So for a $280 million donation, the world's richest man with companies intimately linked and involved in billion-dollar contracts with the Department of Defense gain access into the Pentagon. So would you say that any company right now that has multi-billion-dollar contracts with the Department of Defense has access to the Pentagon right now? 1-hour briefings with you personally?
On the regular
I
basis, I meet with many people and many different companies and many different aspects of our defense industrial base to ensure we have the best possible capabilities. It would be imprudent to do
Well, I'm
otherwise.
sure for an investment of $280 million, Elon's investors are quite happy that it's come out into the billions. I want to jump questions right now. Mr. Secretary, on January 6, 2021, rioters and looters attacked federal law enforcement officials, vandalized and destroyed federal government property, and caused an estimated $2.7 billion in damages right here at the Capitol. Would you have sent the National Guard and the Marines in on that day?
Well, unfortunately, President Trump requested the National Guard in advance, and that was...
It took him quite a long time. I'm asking you, as Secretary of Defense, would you have sent in the National Guard and the Marines on that day? We had 140 Capitol Police officers injured. One died the next day. Would you have sent in the National Guard and the Marines?
As I said, President Trump directed National Guard to be there in advance.
And I think you can look at the record of how long it actually took for him to actually send them in. But it's good to hear that it sounds like you would have sent in the National Guard and the Marines on that day in which the insurrection was taking place right here at the Capitol. Mr. Secretary, during your confirmation hearing, you failed to deny the conclusion that you would carry out an order to shoot protesters in the legs. So let me be direct. Given what we are seeing across the country right now, would you carry out or issue an order by the president for our military to fire upon protesters actively engaging in their civil right to exercise free speech, their First Amendment rights? Would you give that order from the president?
I assume you're insinuating what's going on in Los Angeles, and I wouldn't call
Not just
that a
Los
peaceful
Angeles.
protest.
If we take a look at protests throughout the country, it's a simple question. If directed by the president, would you order our military to fire upon protesters? Simple yes or no.
Ma'am, we have, as you know, and as this committee knows, we have standard rules of engagement that are in place that give guidance to our troops, and they abide by them.
I'm asking what you would do. Again, you said you serve at the pleasure of the president. Is that not true?
I do serve at the
So
pleasure.
if the president told you to shoot people in the legs, would you do so? Now, you failed to answer this question as well in your confirmation hearing when asked by members of the Senate.
Because I refuse to accept a false hypothetical that's attempting to put me in a corner and make it look like a
At
representation.
a time when we have more Marines and
standard
National
rules of
Guard in
engagement
Los
and they are
Angeles than
followed.
we do in Syria and Iran alone, I don't think this is a hypothetical. This is an actual situation that we are dealing with right now. So again, I will ask the question, the last 14 seconds I have, would you order our military to shoot at their fellow countrymen if ordered by the president?
I think it's interesting that for 4 years, insurrection was the left's
I think we
favorite
know your
word,
answer. Thank you, Mr.
and
Chair.
that
I
when
yield
it's
back.
invoked in L.A., they were
Gentlelady yields back. Gentlelady's time's expired.
Not even in theory, between protecting Americans and targeting them. That's when the public needs to pay very, very close attention. For the first 30 seconds, you need to understand this. Sometimes the silence of a leader is louder than any confession. And in this exchange, the silence screams that it all begins with a meeting, one that shouldn't raise eyebrows, yet somehow raises every possible red flag. A billionaire with deep personal stakes in military technology, massive government contracts, and a growing sphere of influence was invited into the Pentagon for what officials described as an informal discussion. But Jill Takuda wasn't buying the friendly language or the casual phrasing. She walked in already knowing that these seemingly harmless meetings can reshape entire power structures if no one asks the right questions. Her first question comes in sharp and clean. Did the secretary personally invite this billionaire to the Pentagon? And suddenly, the mood shifts. Instead of answering, he begins dancing around the facts, offering vague statements about incorrect reporting and general discussions. He insists no war plans were shared, but that wasn't what she asked. Her question was simple: who invited him and why? As her questions get more precise, the cracks become impossible to hide. Why was someone whose companies profit enormously from defense contracts allowed behind closed doors with the very department that awards those contracts? Why was someone leading technological systems that directly influence military infrastructure given access to a briefing that, regardless of content, could alter how future contracts are shaped? Takuda lays out the concern elegantly. Conflict of interest isn't always about what IS said. Sometimes it's about what could be learned simply by being in the room. She presses harder. She mentions a $280 million donation, an amount so massive it almost feels fictional, and asks the question echoing in the minds of millions. Does money open the doors that policy and ethics are supposed to keep closed? The secretary responds with polite, practiced dismissals, informal, general, no preference shown. But the more he insists everything is normal, the more abnormal it all sounds. Because the truth Takuda is pointing at has nothing to do with the billionaire at all. It's about the shape of our institutions, how influence slips in, how access is granted, how oversight quietly erodes while the public is told everything is routine. But she isn't done. She pivots sharply, turning the conversation from influence to accountability, from corporate interests to national crisis. January 16th. She asks whether he would have deployed the National Guard and Marines that day. Whether, in a moment of chaos and danger, he would have taken decisive action to protect lawmakers, officers, and the seat of government itself. Again, the question is simple. Again, he refuses to answer. Instead, he references timelines, directives, past decisions by previous leaders. But none of that is the question. She is asking about him, about his judgment, his boundaries, his willingness to act when the country is in danger, that he won't say yes, that he won't say no, that he floats somewhere in the middle, a place where accountability goes to disappear. But Takuda, she sees something no one wants to admit. If a leader can't give a straight answer when the stakes were as high as they were that day, what happens in future crises? What happens if the next emergency isn't in the halls of government, but on the streets of any American city? And that's when she goes for the question that defines everything. Would you obey an order to fire upon protesters? Not rioters, not violent extremists, not individuals threatening lives, she specifies. Protesters exercising their constitutional right to free speech. A question that should terrify anyone in uniform. A question that should have the simplest answer on earth. A question every American deserves a clear response to. He refuses, again and again and again. He hides behind procedural language, rules of engagement, hypotheticals, and committee norms. Anything except a clear moral commitment. It's not just uncomfortable. It's telling. Because a leader who cannot say, unequivocally, that the military will not be used against its own people is a leader who has left the door open to the darkest possibilities. Takuda doesn't flinch. She isn't asking for theatrics. She isn't chasing a headline. She's demanding something deeper, an acknowledgement that the line between civilian oversight and political obedience isn't negotiable. She reminds him, and the country, that there are more National Guard and Marines currently deployed in a major American city than in entire regions overseas. That this isn't some abstract debate. This isn't a hypothetical at all. It is happening right now. She brings the question back again and again. Each time, he dodges, reframes, shifts, evades. And in the last seconds of her time, she lays bare the answer he refuses to say out loud. We know your answer. It hits harder than any accusation, harder than any speech. Because sometimes what a leader refuses to commit to reveals more than anything they proudly declare. But Takuda isn't only exposing one man. She is exposing a pattern, one that the public tends to overlook because it hides behind gentle language, bureaucratic phrasing, and the illusion of routine. Influence creeping through informal meetings, silence where there should be bright red moral boundaries, deflection when democracy demands clarity, loyalty to power instead of loyalty to principle. These are the quiet warning signs that people miss until it's too late. She forces viewers to see the subtle ways institutions bend, not in dramatic bursts, but in small, unnerving hesitations to leaders who can't say no to meetings that shouldn't happen to boundaries that blur, shift, and eventually disappear. Because the truth is simple. Democracies don't crumble in explosions. They erode through silence, through access sold quietly, through leaders who won't commit to protecting the public from the whims of those above them. Her questioning isn't about sensationalism. It's about revealing the fragility of the system, how much relies on the character and courage of individuals who are supposed to uphold the rules, not rewrite them under pressure. She shows how influence becomes normalized, how oversight becomes optional, how power becomes personal, how a single unanswered question can echo across a country that expects better by the time the hearing ends. Something has shifted. Not because he made a confession, but because he didn't. Because his refusal becomes the evidence. His silence becomes the warning. And Takuda's message lands with the force of truth you can't ignore. Power tested without accountability becomes dangerous. Access granted without oversight becomes corruption. Authority exercised without moral clarity becomes a threat to the very people it claims to protect. If you believe the military should never be turned inward against citizens, if you believe billionaires shouldn't buy their way into the rooms where decisions about national security are shaped, if you believe leaders should answer direct questions with direct truth, then this moment matters. Because this wasn't just a hearing. It was a mirror held up to power. And what it reflected should concern every American paying attention. That if you want more breakdowns like this, raw, detailed, and unfiltered, make sure to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell so you never miss a moment that exposes how power really works behind the scenes. And drop your thoughts in the comments. Should a defense secretary be required to answer these questions directly, or was the dodging itself the real answer?